How many of you are ready for this financial series of preaching to get over with? Some of you are like, yeah, I'm done. I'm done getting beat up. After we could just move on to something else. How about butterflies and rainbows? Right? I've heard lots of stories, I feel obligated to bring Mike up to speed because I doubt very highly that Mike, while he was on the sunny beaches of Maui, was attending church with us on video. Amen, brother. And I gotta tell you, the last time I preached on finance stuff, on generosity, this guy won't shut up about it. He keeps telling the district office and everything that we got to figure this out, and he thinks that this is amazing, and it is. It is amazing stuff. Okay? So I gotta tell you, I didn't plan that you would be gone for the first 3 weeks of this sermon series. But in your honor, we'll do a little review, because I never review anything in the sermon series, okay? So we're going to review. We're talking about balance, this balanced life of our finances and our heart, where our heart is, that's where our treasure is, okay? But also, in the greater, bigger picture of this balance with our finances, with our stuff, not just our money, our stuff, with our relationship with God, okay? What does God ask us to do? He wants us to be following Him, of course, obedient to Him. And that takes balance. And we said, in the very first week, 3 weeks ago, we said there are 3 laws in order to be balanced, not just financially, this is just balance, your own body balance, right? So we said you needed to have a reference point, you needed to have constant correction, and you needed to have a clear objective, okay? If you would like to follow along and take notes, those are your first 3 things you can put on your page, okay? Mike's doing good. He missed the first 3 weeks. He's already jotting stuff down. Good job, Mike. You get a gold star. And I would put it right. So we got to have our reference point. When we balance, I made a lot of you missed this, Mike. You would have laughed. It would have been amazing. Okay? So I got everybody to stand up on the first week and to stick one leg out and balance on one leg as long as they can. Mike, it's your turn. You got to get up and balance for us. One leg. One leg. One leg off the ground. Hey, you can't use the chair. Okay, sit down. So when we balance like that, we've got to have a reference point. We often look straight ahead. We try to focus on one point that tells us how to balance, okay? If we waver off of that point, it helps our body correct. We've got our core muscles, we've got our leg muscles. If you're standing on one leg, the leg that is planted on it, your body is making so many adjustments in your ankle, in your leg, in your hip, in your core muscles, trying to keep balance. That's the constant correction thing. So once you have your reference point and you know where you're at, then you're constantly correcting, constantly analyzing where you're at so that you can reach your objective, okay? A clear objective. The first week we looked at our reference point, and that was knowing where our money is going. Okay? We cannot get to where we want to be if we don't know where we are at. Okay, so our reference point is to be honest with ourselves, be honest with God, and be honest with our spouse if we've got someone that we share finances with, okay? And understand exactly where we are. We have a reference point. That's where we begin our balance. Then 2 weeks ago, we looked at our clear objective. We said that everything belongs to God. Amen? It's like you guys don't actually believe that everything belongs to God. It's like some of you are going, except for myself. But in reality, everything belongs to God. Amen? Everything belongs to God. Everything comes from God. Everything is distributed by God. And He doesn't do it equally. He doesn't do it fairly. Okay? We just got to get that fair thing out of our head. God blesses the way that God blesses because God has way more information about everybody than we do. God knows why He does what He does, and we don't, and that's okay. Okay? So our clear objective was to take that understanding that everything belongs to God, everything comes from God, everything is distributed by God with a purpose, and so our objective would be we are to honor God with His stuff that we just happen to be taking care of there at home. With all that we are, everything that we have, not just our tithe, but with all of our stuff that we have purchased, with our jobs, with our responsibilities, with ourselves, our time, everything, we are going to honor God. And I challenged you that day to go home sometime that week, and I dared you, triple dog dare, to ask God, God, now that I understand that everything is yours, everything comes from you, everything is distributed by you, and I know where I'm at, I know what I have a clear picture and understanding, my reference point of where I'm at. God, how would you have me honor you with what you've given me? And I warned you that if you asked that, I dared you, but then I warned you to be ready for God to utilize all the stuff He's blessed you with for His glory. And that may mean that you would give up stuff. If God says, I need you to give it up, I need you to give it to somebody else, I need you to sell it and take that money and give it to somebody else. I need you to do this with that, okay? We just fall in line and say, yes, sir, yes, God, I will do it. Because it's not my stuff, it's your stuff. It's not my money, it's your money. It's not my job, it's your job. It's not my company, it's your company. Okay? All these things, we have a reference point, we have our clear objective to honor God. And last week we started talking about constant correction, and we started with consumer debt. And we said that consumer debt is like paying someone to be your master. And you are enslaved. And you have chosen, it is your choice, to take on that debt. And so you literally are paying someone else, a bank, a person, whatever, wherever your loans are located, wherever your credit is, you are paying someone else to be your master. And we talked about Jesus telling us you can't serve two masters. You either love one and hate the other, and on, okay? And so our challenge last week is to look at the consumer debt, wherever we were at, whether we have a lot or a little or none, and say, I need to get out of this place so that I can increase my margin of generosity. We said God gives us enough what we need to live, then He blesses us with even more stuff, and that's our margin of generosity. That's how He works through us to help other people, okay? The stuff. And so in order to increase that margin, we have to stop with all of the stuff that we're paying somebody else. Because every time we pay somebody else, we're decreasing our margin of generosity. We're serving another master, and God can ask all He wants for us to do this and do that, but we don't have the means because we are legally responsible to pay off that debt. So we say we can try to get out as fast as we can of consumer debt. We talked about Dave Ramsey, we talked about all this. We're going to have accountability. We're going to open our books to other people so they can help hold us accountable. We're just going to be honest where we're at. Constant correction. We also said that consumer debt takes away our margin for generosity. It's paying somebody else to be our master. It isn't a problem if we... this was the challenge I asked us. Isn't it a problem if we can't meet needs of people who are in need because we're paying for things that we didn't really need? If God is showing us needs right in front of us, people who have needs, and we say, I would love to, but I don't have anything. All my resources are caught up in having to pay off stuff. Okay? Isn't it a problem if we can't use what God gave us to help those in need because we're in debt to things that we didn't really need? So today we're going to put a new line item in our budget. We talked about it a little bit before. We have a savings budget. Most of us, we want to save, put away things for retirement or whatever. We have a spending budget. Okay, that's our mortgage, our rent, our bills. We have to spend, we have to live. We got to have food, we got to have groceries, we have all those things. And we're going to put a new line item in. It's the total of this sermon, a new line item. We're going to have a giving budget, and we're going to put it in. And I asked a couple weeks ago if any of you had that. A few of you raised your hands. Yes, I have a giving line item in my budget. So we're going to talk about this, what it means to have this. And we fully understand, you don't jump from last week if you've got any consumer debt and then say this week I'm going to put a line item in, but it's going to take me a while to get off consumer debt. Yeah, keep that line item there and work really hard at getting off of that so that you can then fulfill your budget and increase your margin of generosity. So we're going to talk about, in the realm of constant correction, another constant correction, and this one impacts our extra, okay? And some of you, so when I say that word, I know instantly some of you are going, extra what? What extra? I don't got any extra. Okay? And some of you might be thinking, since you don't have any extra, or you think you don't have an extra, sweet, I don't have to listen. Because this is in no regards to me, because I don't got any extra. You're wrong. Because we all have extra. Okay? We're going to look at that in just a second. But maybe some of you also, maybe some of you are giving me the stink eye because you have extra, and that extra is yours, and you don't want anybody telling you what to do with your extra. Okay? And right now, it's running through your head. Who do you think he is telling me what to do with my extra? It's mine. Okay? I work hard for that. That's my reward. It's mine. Well, I got to tell you that. Because if everything belongs to God, and everything comes from God, and everything's distributed by God, and we're going to honor God, everything we have needs to go to God. What about me? That's the big question, isn't it? What about me? Now, I realize that some of you don't have as much extra as you want. I get that. And so that may turn into, I don't have any extra. And simply, it's just that you don't have as much extra as you want. You have stuff that you want. Okay, I get that. And I would say, amen, I agree. Most of us, if not all of us, say, we don't have all the extra that we want. I can always do with a little more, right? Right? I know all of you would gladly admit to that. You can always do with a little more. And I know also that you don't probably think you have as much extra as some of the people you know. So you're saying to yourself, well, maybe got a little extra. But that guy over there, he has a lot of extra. So he needs to make up for me. And I got to remind you, God doesn't evenly distribute. Okay? He just says, I'm going to bless you the way that I bless you. I'm going to ask you to do with the stuff what I ask you to do with the stuff. That's you and me. That's between you and me. It's not anybody else. Okay? Whatever I ask them, that's what they do. And if they don't do it, that's between me and them. It's not you. So, we're going to look at extra. Chances are you have more extra than you think you do. How many of you would say that you have more than your parents did when they were your age? Okay? I wholeheartedly, my parents are probably watching, I wholeheartedly say that at this point in my life, I have more, and my kids have more than my parents did and I did at this time in their life. I'm blessed. We all are. Okay? I would say chances are we probably could all agree that we have more extra than a vast majority of the population in this world. Because we live in the greatest country in this world. We live in a country of abundance. We have the vast majority. We have way more than most. We have more extra. Most people don't have any extra in this world, but we do. Okay? So some of you are still thinking, I object. It's mine. Okay? Again, I'm still on this. I don't have any extra money lying around. True. I will say true. You probably don't have any extra money lying around. You probably don't have any gold bars lying around, or silver bars, or bronze ingots, or precious gems or jewels just lying around, extra in your house. And I got to say, because of our society, our culture, the way that all of us are, we rarely have extra lying around. We put it into something else. We find stuff to do with it. The adage really is true that we rise to whatever living we have, right? That we make. If we get a raise, most of us, it's not really that we got a raise. We find something to fill up that all of a sudden. But we still live paycheck to paycheck because we found something for that extra money to go to. Right? So I want you to remember. I said it in the very first week. I want you to remember, whenever you have more of something than you need, the tendency is to become undisciplined with that thing. If you have more money than you need to live, the tendency is to become undisciplined with that money. You buy stuff you don't need. You spend it on stuff you don't need to do. Okay? The tendency, this is not 100%, tendency of humanity is to, when we have more, when we have extra, to be undisciplined with it. Okay? So I have a space in your note page that has what you probably think is an abundance of lines that are empty. Okay? And my question for you through this sermon and into this next week, your homework, if you will, maybe some of you have started right now, is what are your extras? Okay? And you got, I just got some blank numbers up on the screen. You've got some lines on there, and you're probably thinking, most of you right now, I don't have a lot to put there because I already told you, Pastor, I haven't got any extra. And I felt the same way, honestly. Because the vast majority of the time, Denise and I, we're not poor off, okay? But we find stuff to do with our money. And we live paycheck to paycheck, so to speak. Okay? When we are getting close to the next pay period, we know. We don't have to know a date on the calendar. We just know because we don't have that much money left in our checking account. Okay? So I sat down this week and I said, God, if I'm going to preach about this extra stuff that we're going to talk about in this passage in Luke, I want to know what extra stuff I got. Okay? Because I don't feel like I got a lot of extra. So maybe you need some help. I sat down, I said to God, what are my extras? And I'll just dare you to ask God that very thing yourself. And then listen to what he says. I was thinking to myself, I'm sitting in my office, I kind of kid myself here. There is so much stuff that I don't have, that I would like to do, but I can't. And I can't get it, and I can't do it because we mostly live paycheck to paycheck. We have some consumer debt I'm working on trying to get paid off so that we can have an increase in our margin of generosity. But I can't possibly have that much extra. And I was wrong. Any of you ever go to God and you say, God, you got to show this to me because I'm just like, maybe I'm as dumb as a post. And God makes it so clear that, yes, you are as dumb as a post. So let me help you out with my own list, and this is not an extensive list because I gave up after a few of these things because God made it abundantly clear that I have way more extra than I could ever think. Okay? So here's the thing. You might have extra if you pay attention to Jeff Foxworthy, that you might be a redneck if you do this, that, and you might have extra if, like me, you have ever eaten out where someone made food for you that you didn't have to grow, collect, prepare in any way, shape, or form. If you've ever eaten in a restaurant, you've got extra. Some of us, we eat in a restaurant how many times a week? Okay. Then we got extra. But I got to eat to live, Pastor. I understand that. It might be a lot cheaper to get your own stuff. I don't know. We can test God. Okay? If you're able, I was thinking about this as we're getting ready to have a movie night with the teams on Friday night. If you're able to go watch a movie in a theater, you have extra. You have surplus. Okay? Because I don't know if you guys have been to a movie lately, but if I take my family to a movie, it's like $50 just to get in the door. And then they want $9 for a pop. And popcorn. $9. $8.75 to be exact. Would you like butter on that? Are you going to charge me? Because those little kernels that pop into nothingness didn't cost you $8.75. But I buy it because I have extra. Here's something. If you have a cell phone, you have extra. How many people got a cell phone? How many people have a drawer in their house where old cell phones reside? You got extra. You got surplus. How many of you have a car? have a car for every person in your family that's legally capable of driving? How many of you on top of that have another vehicle? I'm still raising my hand. I got 2 cars, I got a motorcycle. I only have 2 people in my house that can legally drive. I'm looking at Steve because he's got a tractor. That still counts as a vehicle. And a motorhome. I'm not calling you out, Steve. I got just as much stuff. I got a trailer. Okay. If you got a car, or 2 cars, or 3 cars, plus a motorcycle, you might be having a little extra. You might have some surplus. Along with your car, does your car have a house? I've said this before. Does your car have a house, a roof and walls, a door to shut behind it? And some of you are saying, yes, but it doesn't reside there because I kicked it to the curb because I got so much extra, it has to be in the car's house. I'm just saying. You know who you are. I got a 1-car garage. All my vehicles can't fit in it. I got a car and a motorcycle and a whole mess of stuff. And if you're careful, you can open the door of that car without hitting my motorcycle and knocking it over. And if you're careful on the other side, you can squeeze out of the door without disturbing everything on the shelves. And if you need to, you can just open the freezer and get some dinner before you close the door and get inside. Okay? I'm just saying. Do you have a house for your cars? And have you kicked your cars to the curb because you got so much extra, it's got to reside in the room that you never really go into? TVs. You got a TV? Everybody got a TV? I have a 65-inch TV. I bought it used. Don't look at me like that. I helped a brother out, Brian. He's moving. He need to get rid of his TV. I bought his TV. But the problem is I have another TV in another room. I don't really need to. I got extra. I'm sure there may be some people in this room who have more than that. And if you take into account that y'all got cell phones, and most of them are smartphones, and you can watch TV on your smartphone, you'll go, oh, oops, I really do have more than that. Do any of you pay someone else to make a wonderful, delicious cup of hot coffee? Larry Gladwell. I pay somebody else to make coffee for me sometimes we use gift cards. And sometimes those gift cards are given to me by lovely people like you. And sometimes they're not. I get them myself, so I don't have to have cash with me when I go get my coffee. I got extra. I got surplus. Okay? Do you have... I'm not speaking against my wife. You have a seasonal wardrobe. A seasonal wardrobe where you have a closet full of clothes. And in the top of that closet or in another room, you have containers of other clothes that are not for the season you're currently in. And when the seasons change, you say it's time to swap out. You might have a little extra, a little surplus. Mike, this one's for you. I thought of you. And I'm only saying that because I don't want to direct any more attention to myself. If you have pajamas, work clothes, sweats, relaxing clothes, okay. Get out of work clothes when you get home, you got sweats. Okay. But you also have workout clothes, maybe you go to the gym. And you got golf clothes. And you got work in the yard clothes. And you utilize all those outfits in one day. You might have extra. I don't know about you, this is just, I'm looking at me. Have you ever traded anything in or gotten rid of it for something else of the same thing, but the thing you're trading in works just fine? It's just missing the fact that it's the newest, latest, greatest model. you ever participated in a garage sale? Or a yard sale? Church. Either or, Marty, because if you're a seller, you got extra, and if you're a buyer, you're buying extra. A garage sale just says, come buy all my extra junk that I don't use anymore. If you have ever given anything, donated anything to the church so that you could get the same thing but better, extra. Have you ever cleaned out your refrigerator? One of the greatest wastes this country does is food. We have so much extra food, we don't know what to do with it. We let it rot. And then we clean out the refrigerator and throw it away. And sometimes you throw it in the garbage disposal because you don't want it stinking up your garbage. So you put it in the garbage disposal, especially with organic stuff. That's your extra disposal. Grind it up, push it down the drain, extra. What are your extras? I mean, we laugh about all this stuff, but every single one of these is true to me, folks. I'm blessed. I'm blessed beyond measure. And until I actually sit down and put pen to paper and I give God permission to point out my extras, and He points out the lunacy of some of these things, then I have the audacity to challenge Him and say, where's my extras? I got so many things that I want, and I don't have them. All the while, God's looking at me and saying, what about the stuff you have? You got so much stuff that you don't use. The problem is we are so accustomed to extra in our life that we feel actual financial pain when we have less extra than when we used to. Okay? I want you to think about if you have a job, and you've been working at your job, and all of a sudden the boss comes to everybody to get an all-employee meeting, and you know something bad's about to happen, because they never have an all-employee meeting unless there's something bad about to happen. And the boss says, the profits are not where they need to be, we're cutting everybody's pay by 10%. Any of you ever experienced that before? Have you seen people flip out about that 10% or that 20%? Because all of a sudden that extra's gone. Now, it doesn't mean by any means that decrease in pay, that all of a sudden they can't pay their mortgage and they can't have food and they can't do all this, the necessities of life. It doesn't mean that. To them it may, because all of a sudden they got all those extra things and that they owe for, and now they really can't pay something because they've got so much abundance of extra. And they've sold themselves to the slavery of debt. We're so accustomed to extra in our country, we actually feel pain in our checkbooks and our pocketbooks when something hits, even if it's little, and it affects our extra. It isn't very often that I drive through town and wonder why I have so much. Okay, I don't know about any of you, but I've never found myself driving down the street thinking to myself, why do I have so much? Why am I so blessed? Okay? I will guarantee you, almost daily, I drive down the street and I think to myself as I pass things, how come I don't have that? I'm blessed to have a motorcycle. Most of you were part of my journey to getting a motorcycle. You heard me gripe and complain on that sermon on prayer that if I pray for things that I want, God doesn't necessarily give me everything that I want. I want a motorcycle, but it's not showing up. And then you were here when I told you that my wife said for 17 years of our marriage, if we ever buy a house, we can buy a motorcycle. And guess what? God helped us buy a house! So I said, motorcycle! And 4 weeks after we moved into that house, I had a motorcycle. I've been riding on my motorcycle down the street. Indian motorcycle was coming the other way. And I'm thinking to myself, while riding on extra, this blessing, this gift, how come I don't have that? It's only, the one that I want, is only $30,000. That's a covet, not really a want. It's definitely not a need. Because even though I want it, I know practically that spending as much as I could to buy several used cars on a thing I can't even carry groceries on, and no one else can ride with me, is probably not the best thing to do. But yet, as I drive down the road, I say, why don't I have that? Why don't I have a house like that? I got a perfectly good house. I still owe 27 years on it, okay? But I want something bigger. Why can't I have that house? Why can't I have that truck? Larry had to go get a new truck. Makes me covet. I'm breaking the commandment. I want a truck. And instead I drive a 14-year-old minivan that gets me from A to Z. It has never broken down on me, if that really meant anything at all. It has been the most reliable vehicle we've ever owned. And I'm blessed to have it. And I can haul teens with it, and I can do so many things with it. Culture keeps so many of us laser focused on what we don't have. Focusing on what we don't have makes our hearts vulnerable to greed, and greed is bad. Because as long as I'm on a quest for more, I will always assume that when more comes along, it's always for me. I'm going to say that again. Greed's bad, because as long as I'm on a quest for more, I will always assume that when extra comes into my life, when blessing comes into my life, I will always assume it's for me, and not for a purpose that God has set up. Last week we talked about margin, we talked about consumer debt, cutting in on our margin for generosity, that it takes away from our ability to do what God wants us to do with His stuff, because way back when we said to ourselves, maybe not these words, but it really is what we said, God has blessed me with some stuff, but I don't have enough stuff, so I need to figure out a way to get more stuff than what God has already blessed me with. Credit card, home equity loan, payday loan, whatever. Greed is the root of that thought process, and it gets us to a place where our margin shrinks, sometimes to a place where we have zero margin whatsoever. God has given that desire to us. I've got some stuff right in front of you. I really need you to do it. And you say, but I can't, God. I don't have anything to do that with. And it starts a conversation with God that we don't want to go down because we know why. God just wants to be real with us, wants to be honest with us, and He says, what have you done with the stuff I gave you? I gave you more than enough to do what I have planned for you to do. So how come you aren't doing it? We don't want to admit it. We felt like what God gave us was not enough, so we had to get more. Greed could easily be defined as this. It's not the definition, the dictionary definition, but it could be easily defined as this. The assumption that life's extras are for our own consumption. That's at the heart of greed. That whatever comes along, the blessing, the extra, that's for me. That's for me to use, for me to consume. It's all for my own benefit. It's not what God's going to do with it. It's not what God has planned for it. It's what I'm going to do with the extra. A trip. I'm going to go to Disneyland. It's the reward. It's the, hey, I got a raise. Let's go out and have a meal we probably really can't afford at a restaurant that we've never been to. Nothing wrong with that, but it's what God asking us to do. It's a new car, a new video game, a new hobby. More on that habit that we should kick because it's for us. It's mine. That kind of attitude leaves us with, again, little to no margin for generosity for what God has set before us to fulfill His plan through us. The question so many of us are so quick to ask is, God, why don't I have more? Why do they have more than me? When we don't have enough, we wonder why. And maybe God is asking us, what have you done with what I gave you in the first place? Don't you see that you have more than enough, but we're consumed with stuff? addresses this head on. And so if you haven't turned to your Bibles already or your devices to Luke chapter 12, I invite you to do that, starting at verse 13. And this, just going through these few verses is going to wrap up what I'm talking about. Luke chapter 12, starting at verse 13. We're not talking about the rich young ruler, we're talking about the rich fool in this passage, this character. Okay? Luke chapter 12, starting verse 13, says, One day a man was accusing his brother of being greedy because he wouldn't give him his fair share of the inheritance. Teacher, he says to Jesus, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. And Jesus replied, Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you? Then he said to them, Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in abundance of possessions. I underline that in my Bible. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Could you say that? Just read it off the screen. My life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. Do you believe? Your life, living life, does not consist. That word sounds really weird to me, so I went and looked it up. Consist equals composed of, made up of. My life is not made up of the stuff that I have. How I live my life, how I honor God, is not dictated by what I have. It's dictated by God. My life does not consist in the abundance of my possessions, Jesus says. You want real life? Let's get away from those possessions. Going on in chapter 16, he says this. He told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. He thought to himself, What shall I do? I have no place to store my extra crops. Got extra crops. Okay? An abundance of harvest. So much so, he has no place to put it. This happened when I was in Nantes about 4 years ago. The apple harvest in Washington was huge, ginormous. The amount of storage units or houses they have for controlled atmosphere could not contain all the apples. And if you drove down the road between Nantes and Yakima, where most of the fruit warehouses are, you saw rows and rows of bins and bins of apples wasting in the sun because there was nowhere to put them. So they just rotted. This guy, this farmer, this certain rich man has produced a good crop. His land has produced a good crop. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my extra crops. This is a bonus to me. It's a blessing to me. What am I going to do? Okay? But here's the deal in that verse. This man is missing kind of a point here that we all need to focus in on. He had extra because of things that were out of his control. God blessed him. But he didn't do anything with that soil. He didn't do anything with the rain or the sunshine or anything that caused those crops to grow and be abundant. God gave him all those things, blessed him with it. He has an abundance. He had no control over it. It's not his. But he's treating it as his. He had extra because of things out of his control. I think that's what we would call blessing. Extra in my life with things I have no control over. Blessing. Going on to verse 18, he says this. Then he said, This is what I'll do. I got it all figured out. I will tear down my barns and I will build bigger barns. And there I will store all my extra grain and my goods. There I will store all my extra grain and all my goods. This is not a bad idea. If this life is all there is, but this life isn't all there is. It's a good plan to increase his storage capacity. He was planning ahead, but I would say he's just not planning far enough ahead. He's not planning far enough ahead. He is planning for the immediate future, but not for eternity. He's got his mind on the wrong route. Going on to verse 19, he says, I'll say to myself, After I've torn down my old barns, I've built my new barns, I have all this massive storage capacity to house all of my extra goods and grains, okay? I'll say to myself, you have plenty of extra, good things laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. There's someone right now going, sweet, there's a scripture that says eat, drink, and be merry. But that's out of context. The guy speaking these words is a fool. I'll say to myself, you have plenty of extra, good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. A good plan again. If you have many years, if you could control how long you're on this earth, that would be fine. If he could control what was going to happen in the future, if he could say that next year there wouldn't be a famine or a drought, he'd have no crop, that would be fine. He would have built that big storehouse and then all of a sudden there's nothing in it now. If he could control any of these things, this would be a good plan. But just like he didn't have control over the weather or the soil or the bounty of his crops, he didn't have control over time either. And if the story had ended right there, he would have been a role model. But instead, he assumed his extra was for his consumption and his alone. It was for his benefit. But God said to him, you fool. This very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get the extra that you have prepared for yourself? God says to him, you fool. He's not a fool for being rich. God gave him those blessings, okay? God put him in a place. God blessed him with all of his possessions, the land, the crops, everything. God made him that way. You fool. Not for being rich, for being confused about the extra, about the blessing that God was giving, thinking that it was for you and you alone. He didn't know why he had it. This very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get the extra that you have prepared? Somebody else. Not because you're generous, but because you're dead. Now somebody else gets to take and do what they want with it. He ran out of time before he ran out of extra. Because he can't control time. He can't control, really, the things of his life. He can think he can in those plans. He ran out of time before he ran out of extra. We really look at the moral or the subject of this story, the point that Jesus is getting to in verse 21. And it says this. This is how it will be. Total loss. The guy's dead. All of his extra is gone and not given to God. Okay? Somebody else took it. This is how it will be. Total loss. With anyone who stores up things for himself but is not rich towards God. This is how it will be. With anyone who stores up things for himself but is not rich towards God. Rich towards God. We are really good. All of us. We are really good at being rich towards ourselves. I say that to you because I sat in my office earlier this week saying to God, prove to me the extra because I have stuff that I don't have. And he said, can I show you how really good you are at being rich to yourself? Can I show you all the blessings that you have? Can I show you all the things you've done with what I've blessed you with? Can I show you where you put your money? Can I show you where your heart is? We're really good at being rich towards ourselves. Some of us, we're really good at being rich towards others. And others without the influence of God, and that may or may not help. And what I mean by that is, it's not necessarily that God is telling us to help that person, but it's a good thing to help that person, right? All homeless people, all needy people, we just got to help everybody. But maybe God's working on something with them, and He's not saying to us, go and help that person. He's saying, I need to help that person over there. And we go and help, and we're lacking the influence of God in the direction. We're trying to do good things. But maybe we just enabled that person to continue something that God doesn't want them to do. And I'll just say that's no excuse not to do it. Don't tell me I'm not going to help because I don't know what they're going to do. That's not what I'm saying at all. Please don't misunderstand me. My focus, my point of this is, what does God want you to do? To be sure of where God wants us to direct the resources and the abundance and the extra, the blessings that he's given us, what does he have planned for it? But to be rich towards God, to understand that it all comes from God, that he blesses us, and if we're to grab onto this idea that it's not mine, it's his, and we're to say willingly, truthfully to ourselves, God, thank you for the blessing with all this stuff. Now, how do I honor you with it? How? What do you want me to do with it? And if we said that, and we believed it, and we're willing to live it out, to listen to God, to honor God with all his stuff that he has given us, if we're willing to say, Lord, whatever you want me to do with this motorcycle, I'll do it. Lord, whatever you want me to do with this coffee habit, I'll do it. Lord, whatever you want me to do with the credit cards in my wallet, I'll do it. Lord, I want to honor you in all that I do. How can I honor you with what you have blessed me with? That's rich towards God. When we're just willing to recognize that every single thing we are, every single thing we have, comes from God. It's a blessing from him. It's been delegated to us. It's been placed in our hands. And in that, there was a purpose. God said, I have a plan for you, and you're going to be able to do these things. And I want you to do it willingly. I just want you to follow after me, and I'm going to bless you as you do that. And then I want you to do this, and I want you to do that. And oops. Well, you took the stuff that I gave you, and now you've done something else with it. Okay, I'm willing to work with you on that. Let's work on that. No, God, that's not enough. Versus, you're right. That was my decision. I made that. And at the risk to myself, I'm willing to just offer it to you. Whatever you want me to do, it's yours. That's being rich to God. When we say that and then follow through with that and do that, what God says to do with it, that's a dangerous place to be. That thing that I long for so much. I'll just use my motorcycle as an example. The thing I long for so much. Did I ask God if I could have a motorcycle? No, because I want a motorcycle. Could God use that? Absolutely. If I'm willing to let him use it. Could God say, you know, Ryan, I never wanted that for you in the first place. I got a different direction. I need you to go. Can you get rid of it? Absolutely. I'm praying. Praying that prayer. What would you have me do, God? How would you have me honor you? If you assume the extra is all for you, you're out of balance. And you need to make constant correction. If you assume that all the blessings that are given you, if you assume that all the stuff that's given to you by God is yours to do with what you want, you're out of balance. Out of balance with God. Out of balance with yourself. If you have a simple savings plan and you have a simple spending plan but no giving plan, you need to make a correction. Maybe it's, God, out of all this, could you just give me one plan? You tell me what to say, you tell me what to spend, you tell me what to do. And it'll be your plan and I'll follow it. It's time to put a new line item in our budget. I will increase my margin of giving, and my extra will be available for God to do whatever he wants. That's a big step. The hugest step would be able to say, God, not just my extra. Everything. My house, my cars, my job. It's all yours. What would you have me do to honor you? When you think the extra is for you, you will save carefully, and the vast majority will give sparingly. If you think it's yours, it's for retirement, it's for that new RV, that new boat, or saving up for a house. Never had a house before, you save up for a house. Whatever it is, if you think it's for you, you will save carefully because all of us, given an opportunity to get what we want, do the work to get it. But we'll give sparingly because we have our heart over here at what we want, what we're saving for, and that takes that margin. 2018, the average American gives 2% away in the United States. Now, if you take into consideration that over 70% of our country claims to be Christian, we got a problem. Not just 10% tied to a church. Okay? God says to do that, great, awesome. There's more than that. There's more to life. The margin for generosity is far more than 2%. But we're stuck. We're stuck in the cycle of stuff. We're stuck in the cycle of consumer debt. We're stuck in the cycle of constant correction, but we're correcting for the wrong direction. We're correcting for our own sake, not God's sake. When you know the extra is from God, when you know that all of it is from God, then you will live a life of generosity. Generosity to yourself. Because when we live in the boundaries of what we need to live, not what we want, we tend to live a happier, more joyful life. We'll be able to live a life of generosity and saying, God, I got all this stuff. I have this abundance of stuff. What is it that you want me to do with it? And he says, I need you to go over here, and I need you to take that stuff. I need you to give it to that person. I need you to go over here, sell that stuff, take the money over to that person. I need you to go over here. I need you to take food to these people. And you're just like, woohoo! Purpose in my life. Doesn't it feel good to know that you're right there with God, ministering to those in need? Fulfilling what Jesus says. When I was thirsty, he gave me something to drink. When I was hungry, he gave me something to eat. When I was naked, he gave me clothes. When I was in prison, he came and visited me. All those things that lead up to a well-done, good and faithful servant. But folks, I'm not working for that day that says, well-done, good and faithful servant. I don't know when that'll come. But today, I want to be right in step with the Holy Spirit, right where God is, in the fullness. And that means increasing my margin. And that means giving my stuff over to God and saying, what do you have me do? If there's risk in that, he may say, sell off all your stuff. Okay, honey. Because I know that free girl. This is what God's telling her to do. If God has blessed you with more than you need, it is so that you can share your abundance with those who need. It's not so that you can buy stuff that you don't need. God has blessed you with more than you need to breathe, to live, to survive, shelter, food, bills. I get all that. If God has given you that and more, he's given you the ability to share his great abundance with people who don't have the necessities of life like you. But this forces an adjustment in our savings and our spending. That's constant correction. And that brings balance. It brings balance to our relationship with God. It brings balance to our checkbooks, our savings accounts. It brings balance to our life. So what do we do with the extra? It's an indication, what we do. It's an indication of whether or not we believe what Jesus said in this passage, that our life consists in the abundance of our possessions. And we can live that way and go against what Jesus is saying in this parable, or we can live the way Jesus says, sacrifice all our stuff. Wow. What do you believe? I believe the task before us is to be rich towards God. To be rich towards God. To enrich the people around us. To bring life to our relationships. I believe we need to be rich towards God. This week, I need you to do this application. I need you to figure out how rich towards God you've been. Some of you can lay it all out and say, I'm more than 2%. Awesome. Praise God. Keep it up. Dare to ask God, would you have me do more? If you look at your records and you say, God, I'm just like everybody else, the average American, I've only been given 2%. Show me how to honor you with the stuff you bless me with now. And be ready. Make up your mind. Choose to add a new line item to your finances. And I mean literally. You put it in your budget. God's giving. God's money. God's stuff. However you want to label it. You put a new line item in that says, I'm going to start giving more. I'm Start being generous. It's the beginning of the tax year. It's a perfect time. It's January. Let's get into a good habit. Pre-decide now your margin of generosity. Ask God, hey, God, what percentage do you want me to give? Some of you say, God already said that. He said 10%. Now cut you up to 50%. That's a long time ago. Thousands of years, folks. What does God really want you? Jesus never said 10% in the New Testament. He said, I just want all of you. Are you willing to accept that all the stuff's God's? You're willing to say, yeah, I'm right in there. Let's go. Figure a percent. Some of you may just say, God, I'm going to grab onto it. That's all I am. 100%. It's yours. I'll trust you for my life. Okay? I'll go beyond the 10%. I'll trust you with my life, with my job, with all my stuff. I'll say it's all yours. And I'm going to work with you every day to pay that bill, to feed that person, to take care of my own family. Have some fun. God's a fun God. He wants us to have fun and enjoy life. But decide your margin of generosity. Have that discussion with God. Figure out how rich you've been towards God, and then let's move forward. God may say, you're doing great, I need you to stay right there. Awesome. You let God say that. But I dare you to ask. I dare you to ask God, where am I at? Where's my margin, God? And what do you want it to be? What do you believe? Is your life wrapped up in the consistence of possessions and the abundance of possessions? Or is your life a mountain of blessing that God says, go?